Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition. I'm Jon Macri, and while the preseason Hall of Fame game is going to be going on right at this moment as we're recording, I'm looking forward to getting you, the good ID people, ready for the 2024 fantasy season. We've gone over my top 24 rankings for linebacker, defensive line, defensive back in recent episodes. And now it's time to dive a little bit deeper and find our favorite sleepers and values heading into this year. So let's get it. Yes, y'all. It's sleepers and values time. There is going to be plenty of value to be had in drafts once again this year, whether it's due to people not being as locked in on camp news, or if it's just the old common theme of drafters drafting based on last year's points. We're going to help you take advantage of that here today. And joining me to do just that from fantasypoints.com, a real life rock star, Mr. Justin Varnes. Justin, how are you, good sir?
Jeezy McKeezy. I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me on. I love any opportunity to come on and chop it up with you. Always a blast. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is always a fun time, right? We've been doing this for a few years now, talking sleepers and values in the off season, and we were able to get together in season last year as well, and hopefully again this year if you got the time. So I always enjoy talking to you, getting to pick your brain and your insight on these IDPs as well. And I think we always find some interesting names that are kind of being undervalued or overlooked in drafts right now, and hopefully kind of bring those names to the forefront a little bit and talk about why we like them, and hopefully help people sort out their drafts a little bit better as that season ramps up. It's August now, so people are going to be drafting in earnest here in a big way coming up. So this is always fun for me. I love talking sleepers.
Yeah, man, this is gonna be fun. It's like the most optimistic time for fantasy football. No one has lost a single game yet. Everybody's still waiting for Christmas morning when they can draft. All the players are in the best shape of their lives. So let's dig in.
Yeah, it's awesome. All our fantasy teams are undefeated at the moment, so it's it's definitely the optimistic time of the year before September and October start to crush our souls a little bit more. But that's what the off season's for, right? It's to be optimistic and hopefully find some more reasons to be optimistic about some of these players going into this year. So as we kind of go through our picks here, you'll hear us probably reference some ADP, which is terribly hard to get for IDP for those that know. But luckily, the IDP show has been running their offseason best balls again this offseason and collecting ADP off of that, which you can get access to on the IDPshow.com. I believe it's $5 a month, and it's part of their draft kit deal. So you could check that out if you want to dive into it yourself, which is what we did here prior to this episode to get a kind of feel for where drafters are this offseason. And it's a smaller sample, 20-something drafts, but I think we could still get a good idea of how people tend to draft and value IDPs this offseason. And there's plenty to learn from there in order to kind of take advantage of potential oversights, right? So let's get into it here. And I wanted to switch up which positions we cover first on these lists. And we're going to start with the defensive backs this time. So Justin, why don't you kick us off with your first sleeper pick of 2024?
Yeah, sure. Would love to. I'm going to start with safety Brandon Jones. Right now, according to the IDP show's ADP, he's coming off the board at DB 43. Which means in lots of drafts, he's not even coming off the boards for you. To me, this is a great example of a sleeper, somebody who's changing roles, changing positions, or changing teams, and that always creates uncertainty. But sometimes that uncertainty creates an advantage if you pay close enough attention. I mean, he was one of a handful of Miami defenders last year who I think struggled in Vic Fangio's defense. And by struggle, I mean he was in Fangio's doghouse for much of the season. Matter of fact, it took an injury to superstar safety Javon Holland to open up a portal in the space-time continuum that actually dropped Jones back into a starting role. So once he got back on the field, he played 7 games of at least 80% usage. In those 7 games, he posted 7, 5, 7, 5, 9, 8, and 8 tackles. So every game between basically 5 and 9 tackles. And that last one was actually during the wild card game. So for the 2023 season, John, you guys over there at PFF gave him a 75 overall grade and a 76.2 coverage grade, which really helps his prospects for staying on the field a little bit more. Now he moves to a new defense. Ironically, he's moving to Denver, and ironically, Denver is finally moving past this Fangio style defense that they've been rocking for the last several years, regardless of the DC. This should be a little bit more man heavy, Fangio's defenses obviously usually feature this left or right safety split where you either play the left side of the field or the right side of the field. That's not for every version of his defense, but certainly was happening there with Justin Simmons and Kareem Jackson in Denver. That should be gone by the wayside. And as I said, he's DB 43. He's being drafted as a bench player, but he really could be a 5 to 8 tackle guy each week. The only thing I want to point out is that he did injure his hamstring the other day in camp, so keep an eye on that. I saw an interview with Sean Payton, and he said that he'd be out a week or 2, so that's still enough time to get him ready for week 1. I think he really should be going a few rounds earlier. He'd make a great DB2 or DB3.
Yeah, I'm with you. I really like Brandon Jones. I think he's for IDP purposes, he kind of brings everything that we want from the safety position, right? He's a super efficient tackler, and every time he's on the field, he's putting up IDP points. The problem with him has always been that he's either not getting a full-time starting job or he's getting hurt, right? So I'm with you. I think this is kind of finally his year that he appears locked into a starting job on the team that's actually going to be reliable in how they use their safeties, or at least they have a history of doing so, right? So if we get that stability from him, along with PJ Locke, who they brought back this offseason as well, I think those guys will probably rotate a little bit of who's playing in the box and closer to the line of scrimmage. But if I had to pick one that's going to do it more often, I'd say it's probably going to be Brandon Jones, just because that's where he plays best, right? He's a great tackler. He does most of his damage around the line of scrimmage. You mentioned his tackle numbers last year across 7 games, and it's been the case for his career, really. I mean, he's outperformed his expected tackle numbers in each of the past 3 seasons. He did so in the 95th percentile in 2021 in tackles versus expected, 98th percentile in 2022, and then last year was 78th percentile. But like you said, it was only 7 games that he actually played. So, hopefully, like you said, the hamstring injury isn't anything serious. If it's a week or 2, maybe we even get him back in a preseason game and a series or 2, just to make sure that he's warmed up and stuff like that. But I'm excited about him. I think there's definitely, plenty of IDP potential there with Brandon Jones. We just haven't got it for an entire season yet, but I think this can definitely be the year. And it's like you said, that range where he's being drafted, that's an easy choice in my mind to kind of take advantage of him. I was looking at kind of who he was around being drafted. Cole Bishop, who I like, a rookie in Buffalo, but he may not even start, right? So he's not going to be on the field. Why would we be drafting him ahead of Brandon Jones? Deron Bland, obviously, he's not going to repeat those pick 6 numbers from last year. That would be insane. Dax Hill might not be a full-time player this year. We'll see what happens there as he moves kind of towards more of a slot role. Sauce Gardner was another one, more, just an average outside corner as far as IDP goes. Obviously better NFL player, but not necessarily for IDP. So I'm with you. I love the value of Brandon Jones in that range. Okay, let's cover another defensive back, safety, of course. One that to me just constantly underrated in terms of IDP, and almost every year in drafts, it feels like he's a value to me. It's Grant Delpit of the Cleveland Browns. So his ADP on the IDP show is safety 21, DB 27, which, it's not as low as what we were getting with Brandon Jones, but he's going after guys like Isaiah Simmons, who, again, we don't know what his role is going to be in New York. It's not likely to be a full-time role. Jamin Davis also not going to be a full-time player. Jalen Petrie, more of a deep safety. We saw how he disappointed last year in D'Amico Ryan's defense. Talanoa Hufanga, another guy that not as efficient as he kind of gets a lot of credit for in the IDP world, and just ahead of Aziz Ojulari as well. So another guy that's a rotational backup at best in New York on the defensive line. So he's kind of in this like gross range of players that I have almost no confidence in like being reliable weekly starters. And he just clearly to me stands out as the best IDP option. He was safety 15 in points per game for us last year. I don't really have much concerns about him kind of getting back to or potentially exceeding that mark in 2024. He's an excellent tackler against the run, just a strong tackler overall. Very clearly has the build to, and the ability to play up near the line of scrimmage, where he's obviously the top IDP safety to target in Cleveland, where they do run a pretty IDP friendly scheme for one box safety, which in this case would be Delpit. And I had written up an article this offseason looking at like projecting defensive schemes heading into 2024, essentially looking at like coverage tendencies combined with past safety alignment and deployment tendencies in order to kind of project the best potential tackle efficiency for our team safeties. And to me, this was important because there's so much volatility with the safety and defensive back position that we just can't trust anything year to year. But knowing potential alignments and deployments is one of the better edges that we have year to year, and that can be trusted, specifically, understanding who those safeties are that are going to play in the box. And in doing that, Jim Schwartz's Browns defense, very man-heavy defense. It projects as tied for second best defensive scheme for tackle efficiency for Grant Delpit, specifically at 9.9%, average safety tackle efficiency being 9.1%. So definitely an advantage to be had. I have him as safety 8, DB 9 in my rankings heading into the season, kind of like the end of the tier 1 options for me as far as I'm concerned. And that's just kind of the way that I approach the safety and DB position. And, people who have watched the DB rankings episode will know is, we're looking for the best baseline production mark way more than anything else, right? So, interceptions, sacks, big plays are so insanely unstable that in no way should we be projecting those or banking on them to repeat from year to year. So even for Delpit, who actually did have a strong big play production last year, like that shouldn't be a major factor in ranking him this year. Instead, just kind of focusing on that baseline production floor and hoping / praying for the big plays to kind of follow, right? So that's how I'm looking at it. I think Delpit is still a value at that safety 20-ish range, but how are you feeling about him heading into 2024 here?
Well, I love that you talked about his reliability, because that's one of the things that I identified early on heading into the season. You talk about how rare it is now that we get a kind of let's call it a traditional box safety role. In other words, somebody who's playing, let's say, 60 or more percent of their snaps, near the line of scrimmage, which obviously is an advantage from the IDP perspective, just in terms of expected tackles. The thing I want to add to that is he thrived in that role. He was one of the more important defenders on that defense in that role. And that was one of the best defenses in the league. So if you're Jim Schwartz and you're looking around as to what to retool, none of us can predict the future. We actually don't know how any of these defenses are really going to look come week 1. So if you have to draft before then, which we all obviously have to do, you're trying to find anything that is stable, that makes you feel like, all right, the chances that this guy is going to play, the chances that Myles Garrett is going to start and rush the passer are insanely high, right? So the chances that Delpit is going to play a similar role because it worked so well and was such a key part of this defense, those chances are high, and I also love what you kind of hammered away in terms of his tackle reliability. Before he got injured, he posted 6 or more tackles in 9 of his 13 games. And that's really about all you can ask, for a safety that, maybe isn't a Derwin James or something. I mean, to me, if I'm in a 1 DB league, let's say I'm in a league playing 1 linebacker, 1 defensive lineman, and 1 DB, I'm fine to wait to the very, very end of the draft and grab Grant Delpit as my DB1, back end DB1. I really feel like he's going to end up as a top 12, top 15, if not slide into the top 10, kind of like what you were saying, John. Love that call.
Yeah.
I'm going to move over and we'll transition to our linebackers now.
Yes.
And one of the guys I want to talk about is Zach Bond, right? So he's now over in Philly. Reports out of camp are that it's actually Bond and not Nakobe Dean who's getting reps with the ones next to Devin White. And that's huge because, as we know, volume is one of the primary drivers for tackle production, particularly for linebackers. So if he keeps that starting gig, and he's logging 1,000 snaps this season, he's going to be a serviceable LB3 or LB4 at worst. Even if he logs 800 to 900, let's say he's coming off, and they play a decent amount of dime, and he's playing 800 to 900 snaps, he can still get you there. He was a 20 snap guy on a crowded linebacker core in New Orleans. Now we should see him in a much higher role. If he ends up as a 2-down back in Philly, then he's going to hit 100 tackles. A player last year who played a very similar role in Vic Fangio's defense. Obviously, Fangio now with the Eagles. He was with the Dolphins last year. That style of player for Vic Fangio is David Long. And David Long had 113 tackles last year. So Bond's coming off the boards as late as LB 97. And now, obviously, we should start to see that move up, right? We're going to see this ADP data get updated as training camp, and particularly once eyes get set on preseason games. So watch that carefully. But if he maintains his role, I would, and particularly if you're drafting soon, let's say you're in a league that's not waiting to the last minute to draft, I think it's a great opportunity now to grab him before your league mates realize he's ticketed for an 80% role. That is, if he fins off Nakobe Dean, but that's looking more and more likely each day.
It does look likely. I mean, I did see, a report from Eagles camp today that Nakobe Dean finally got a chance with the ones there next to Devin White. But then I also saw that Kenneth Gainwell broke his ankles in the open field. So it didn't go well for Nakobe Dean with the ones. And it's been Zach Bond almost all offseason so far, which has been, at first, when you first hear it, you're like, oh, okay, maybe, Nakobe Dean's not fully healthy yet, but he's fully healthy now. And they're still giving those reps to Zach Bond, who's, whatever they feel about him, they obviously feel comfortable, even though I don't even think he has 200 snaps at linebacker to his name in the NFL, right? Like that does appear to be his role, what they're going to use him as in Philly. So it's a good sign for him. I don't know how well it'll work out, but I mean, like you said, volume is key. It's like the running back position on the offensive side of things. Linebacker, we follow the snaps just the same. And, as long as he's not like a, sub package Sam linebacker, just blitzing off the edge, things like that, I think he's going to be great too. Like, he's lined up in the middle of the defense. Every time I've seen any kind of video from the Eagles, that's where he is. And he's dropping into coverage. He's defending the run. He's doing typical linebacker things. So this was a guy that played mostly edge last year, right? And I mean, if we just got to follow what the tea leaves are telling us right now. And right now the Eagles are saying, like, this is going to be one of our starting linebackers. Now we're going to get preseason games. We're going to get a better feel for how these guys are actually deployed in, their lineups and stuff like that, hopefully. So that'll help us kind of get a better feel for it. But I mean, right now, absolutely, Zach Bond should be being drafted from, what did you say? LB 97, something like that. So I like Owen Papo and Troy Reader are going ahead of him. Like, these guys aren't starters. And if they are, they're not going to be full-time starters. So this is a nice spot for Zach Bond. Literally the epitome of a value right now at where he's being drafted. And again, pick him up for nothing. And if it doesn't work out, you could drop him for free. But if it does, you're getting yourself a potential starting IDP linebacker there for the cost of nothing. So you definitely got to be looking at Zach Bond right now, and we'll see how things go the rest of training camp. Okay, how about another linebacker now, and one that does have a lot of experience as a starter at the linebacker position, but will be coming off of injury from last season. It's Matt Milano of the Buffalo Bills, going as LB 38 right now, according to ADP. Like, I know Matt Milano, he's never been like amazing for IDP, right? But LB 38, when he's already back in camp, he's healthy, he looks really good by all accounts. I don't know. We have 32 NFL teams, and not even all of them deploy one full-time linebacker, Cleveland. So for Milano, like, clearly not going to be leaving the field, when he's healthy. LB 38 is, I think, a big discount to kind of take advantage right now. And look, I like Terrell Bernard quite a bit as well. I think he'll be a full-time linebacker too. But that doesn't mean we have to discount Milano's potential outside of the top 32 linebackers. That just feels low to me. When I put together the defensive scheme projections article for potential linebacker tackle efficiency, the Bills were a top 10 team for potential linebacker tackle efficiency, which is something that both Milano and Bernard can definitely benefit from. And I'm not saying they will, but if the Bills decide that they only want to utilize one full-time linebacker, which they did for a while last year, but only because Milano was out. But if they said our two candidates, for full-time snaps are Milano and Bernard, both being fully healthy, I don't think there's too much of a doubt that Milano would be their lone full-time starter if they had to pick one. But again, I think there's top 24 potential with Milano, just purely based on playing time and defensive scheme, which matters more than anything else. So seeing him kind of way down here at LB 38 was just a surprise to me. And another reminder that people put way too much stock into previous years' past finishes, which doesn't work very well for IDP. So how are you feeling about Milano this year? Because I know not everybody loves him. So maybe you have a different feeling on him.
Yeah, that's true. So the one thing I want to piggyback on that you had just mentioned was the chances of Buffalo playing a good amount of dime. The one thing I want to point out is remember that I'm saying remember to the listeners, not to you, John, but remember that Buffalo doesn't have Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde anymore back there at safety. As a matter of fact, due to injury, they're really, really thin at safety. They are signing people off the street to help with safety. So in order to play dime, you need 6 capable DBs, and they are not likely to get many of them from their safety room. So that alone, makes us feel a little bit more confident that the chances that Milano is, where the defense is playing a lot of dime. Remember that it will be a change of pace for Sean McDermott to start playing a ton of dime, because they will do it, but they've been such a nickel heavy defense for so long. And B, with these safeties being as banged up, they have fewer options at defensive back to play that 6th DB spot. And C, we think Milano is probably going to be the dime LB, the 3-down LB as it is now. So lots of things kind of, again, we can't predict the future. You're just looking for as many possibilities that line up in your favor as possible. And to me, all of those line up. Yeah. It's funny you said about the past seasons productions, because I was looking over his season, because remember it was cut short, obviously cut very short. And we had high expectations for him last season, when he obviously got the, Tremaine Edmonds left, he went to Chicago, and all of a sudden this was Matt Milano's defense. We were finally going to see him maybe, have a little bit less tackle competition. So I think he was drafted highly last year on those expectations. And then he had an okay start and then got injured. So if you were somebody who really liked Milano last year, you probably feel a little snake bit. But I looked very carefully at the games that he did play. So he played in basically 4 games before he got injured in the 5th game, right? Of those 4 games, only 2 of them did he play every snap. And there's a reason for that. In those 2 full games, he had 8 tackles and he had 10 tackles, 100% on the field. 8 and 10 tackles, which is what you would want from your LB2 or possibly even LB1. The other two games just happened to be back-to-back blowouts. It was the first one was against Washington, and no Buffalo defender played more than 87% of the snaps. The Commanders got absolutely nothing going. Milano saw just 47 snaps, which is about 20 or 30 fewer than a typical game. He posted 5 tackles that game, but no Bills tackler had more than 7. So when you look at that 5 tackle game, you have to factor those in. Imagine that it's a regular game. He's probably going to get 6, 7, 8, 9 tackles there. The other game was similar situation in Las Vegas, where the every down starters like Milano saw just 35 snaps in another blowout win. Now, of course, these things are going to happen in a season. Teams blow out teams, and then you sit. But for them to be 2 of the 4 games he was involved in, that also really skews what he was capable of. So what I did is instead I looked at tackle rate, right? So if you just take the amount of snaps and look at the amount of tackles he got during those snaps, he posted a 14.2% tackle rate last season on just 211 snaps. So if he happened to keep that rate for 1,000 snaps, he would have posted 142 tackles. That's certainly well within solid, if not high, LB2 range, might even be LB1 range. So to me, I just think he had some incredible bad luck. Now, he's obviously somebody who has been injured a lot. Last year was not the first time he's missed games due to an injury. That is something you also want to consider. But if he's healthy, I think in this role, he'll be a 120, 130, maybe 140 tackle guy for you. And to me, being drafted as an LB4 as he is now, I'd love to have him as an LB2.
Yeah, it's a really nice discount right now. And you're right. There is like something to be said about like these good NFL teams that have the potential to blow out other teams, right? And rest their starters. It happened a few times last year. I think the 49ers, Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw got some rest games in there. Dallas had done it a few times as well. So there's always that potential. But like you said, adding that context into Matt Milano's short season that it was, like, there's definitely, again, it's a full-time linebacker in what's going to be like a linebacker-friendly defense. We hope it, at least how it projects right now. So yeah, I'm with you. It's a nice little spot to kind of take advantage of a good value here for one of the NFL's top linebackers when he's healthy. So how about another linebacker going really late right now as LB66, David Long of the Miami Dolphins? Justin, what do you like about him this year?
Well, I know I just previously mentioned him as part of the Vic Fangio defense having 113 tackles. He was a 75% player for Miami last season. 113 tackles over 823 snaps. He did struggle in coverage, but he excelled against the run, and so. He's already been on interview on tape talking about how much easier Anthony Weaver's scheme is to process, how much quicker he thinks he can play in it. So if he gets, if that helps him with his coverage responsibilities, he might play. I believe he's going to be more in the 900 to 1,000 snap range this season. Last year as a 75% player, 113 tackles, he finished as LB 46. And like you just said, John, he's going off as a LB 66. If you're drafting, if you're starting 2 or 3 linebackers and you have a few bench players, there's a good chance nobody's drafting Long as a starter. I'd love to have him as an LB3. I think he's going to finish in the top 40 this season, assuming he sees a few more snaps, and that is what I'm expecting. So new defensive coordinator, again, not a lot of competition for his job. I thought he really played well. I think he was an underrated player last season. What'd you see?
Yeah, he was actually. He's a fun little player. Like, he's an undersized linebacker, sure, but like I think he does his job well. And he was our number 1 graded run defender last year at the linebacker position. So you love to see that from an undersized linebacker for sure, right? But yeah, I wonder, with this ADP being so low, like I think part of the issue here is that people don't know what to expect from this linebacker core this season. Like, there's maybe a lot of ambiguity in who will be the starter. They got Jordan Brooks there, Anthony Walker as well. And then of course Long, who was a starter for them for most of last year. But like you said, like word out of camp right now is that Long is the one wearing the green dot and calling the defense on the field, which typically indicates a full-time role, most importantly, right? So it's probably another one of those ADPs that will rise as we work our way through the preseason, and as those paying attention kind of see the usage. But still can't imagine that he rises so high that he won't still be a value by preseason's end. And that's what I like about him. I mean, I mentioned the number one graded run defense grade last year, but it led to a 97th percentile mark in tackles versus expected against the run. And he was, funny enough, was second percentile versus the pass. So he ended up 56th percentile in tackles versus expected as a whole. But again, though, like if he's just giving us expected tackle production in a full-time role, then he's very much a startable IDP in most formats and shouldn't be anywhere near LB 66 anymore. So I love this call as David Long is a value. Okay, one more linebacker before we talk about our defensive linemen. I wanted to highlight Kaiser White of the Arizona Cardinals, who is going as LB 30 right now. And he's a guy I like quite a bit coming in. I have him as my LB 13 right now. So he's going behind guys like Jack Campbell, who we still don't know exactly what his role is going to be, although I do like Jack Campbell. I feel pretty excited about him. Devin White is another one. So, we talked about Fangio's defense there. Maybe he's not a full-time player. Christian Harris, I think, is good. But the guys like Dallas Turner, Blake Cashman, there's also questions about playing time there. So obviously, I'm probably a bit more optimistic about White than most, and you don't necessarily need to draft him in the top 15, but I don't think you should be waiting much longer than that either, like especially considering some of the other players coming off the board ahead of him who maybe I'm not as optimistic about. But the thing with White is that he was great last year, like playing as the lone full-time linebacker in a zone-heavy defense. Like I was regularly ranking him among the top 10 weekly linebackers or in that range before he got hurt. And he was delivering that level of production pretty consistently. Like he was LB 14 for us in points per game. And, what's really changed from last year other than, he didn't finish the year out healthy. And I think he missed 4 games or whatever it was. So again, I know what drafters are doing. They're sorting by last year's point totals, and it's leaving value on the board for those of us who are paying attention to kind of the finer details here. And Arizona, based like on that linebacker friendly scheme projections that I did, they're a top 5 defense for potential linebacker tackle efficiency. And White is looking to be the only full-time linebacker on that team. So I don't know why we would pass that up to the point where he's being drafted as LB 30, essentially saying, he's the third worst starting IDP linebacker in the league if we're looking at it like that, the 32 linebackers. But yeah, I mean, I love White at this value. I think everybody should as well. Like, don't let him fall this far when he has, I think, potential to put up LB1 numbers on any given week again, just based on playing time and that scheme once again. So I'm feeling pretty good about Kaiser White.
Yeah, I mean, I think White is viewed as a boring pick is what I think. He didn't really have any throw down, 16 tackle games or, 2 or 3 interceptions or, nothing that really splashed. And again, like Milano, White ended the season injured or, missed several games. And so if you sort by last year's points total, or if you just look up, well, how many tackles did he have? You're like, oh, 90 tackles. That's not very good. Then you can immediately, not really put all that together. He only had 1 game of fewer than 7 tackles. So he's putting up 7 or more tackles. Now, is he putting up 12 tackles a game? No, but very few linebackers these days are. And you can kind of see, there's a trend here, which was unintended, but it just goes to show you that I think it's something that you'll see from more and more IDP analysts, which is that there's the cream of the crop at each position, that clear tier 1, right? Once you get into tier 2 and tier 3, it really becomes murky waters. And that's really where you're going to find value. You're not going to find value in Roquan Smith. Nothing wrong with that. Take him high if that's who you want. But there are so many linebackers in this LB2, LB3 range. Which of the ones here actually have LB1 or LB2 plus potential, and which of the ones can you wait a round or two, let that initial LB run go, knowing that guys like David Long and Kaiser White are back. I agree. I think he's going to finish as a top 15, maybe even top 10 linebacker this season. And yeah, like Troy Anderson is going above him right now, and Troy Anderson might not even start, much less play in every down role. So, and also White's still in his prime. He's 28, right? So I know it feels like White's been around for a while, and he has, but he's certainly not long in the tooth. I think this is, and yeah, like you said, basically zero tackle competition for him at the LB spot, right? He is going to be the man. And as we saw from Alex Anzalone last year, if you just plop a linebacker in the middle of a defense every single snap, they will produce. And I totally think that White's got that capability, and he's a boring pick. We want to get Jack Campbell. We want to get, the hot, the new hotness coming out, or we want to get the rookie or the sophomore who like got the new job, which is awesome. But White'll just sit there and rack up 130 tackles, and you might as well get him a round or two later.
Yeah, it just feels like such a nice value. Like you said, he's not the sexy pick or anything like that, but the consistency and what he can bring to you, on a weekly basis is, it makes up for kind of the highs and lows of some of these other, more exciting linebackers that people might be targeting and might not be playing in as friendly of a scheme, or, be playing as nearly as many snaps. So, I like Kaiser White quite a bit here. But enough about the linebackers. Now let's take a look at a few of our favorite sleepers and values along the defensive line. Justin, let's start with an interior defensive lineman that you picked out here from the Green Bay Packers. What do you like about Kenny Clark?
Well, I mean, I clearly have a problem, because every year I think Kenny Clark is underrated. I mean, it's every single year. And, I think, I look for it now, which isn't healthy. Like, I've talked to my therapist about this. They told me to stop playing fantasy football to lower my stress. So anyway, I'm looking for a new therapist, but he's just one of these guys for me. I just keep thinking like, man, he is so talented, and he's obviously had some strong seasons, but I really think he's got, DL1 in him. I really do. I just think he's phenomenal. Last year he finished as DL39, or if you play defensive tackle heavy leagues, he was defensive tackle 17 in balanced scoring. So he put up 7.5 sacks, 42 tackles. About half of that was solo tackles. But he's the 100th defensive lineman being drafted right now. I mean, he's mostly not getting drafted at all. I mean, I don't understand it. Perennial 4 to 6 sack, 45 to 55 tackle guy out of the DT slot. He's 28, just got a new contract extension. And I always look at that sort of stuff. When we see players who have their 5th-year option declined, or we see players who get contract extensions, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be amazing. But, I said this on a podcast last week. We like to find the few times that a coaching staff is really wrong. Like, oh my God, I can't believe they sat that guy. Now he's on this other team, and he's racking up 300 tackles every season, or some just astronomical, stupid thing like that. That's fun to do. But the reality is, these coaches see these players every single day, every single snap. They know what they have. And for the Packers to throw a bag of money at Kenny Clark is usually a good sign. So the fact that he's 100th, that's madness to me, which is, I'm sure why you see I need therapy. But on top of that, they have a new DC now. Jeff Hafley is there, and he has, to me, this is really the key, right? I think he's always been underrated. Clark has, but this is the key. Hafley has a history of playing his DLs far more one gap than Clark has been able to play in the past several seasons. Hafley is known for, being much more of an attacking style defense, particularly up front. I think Clark is underrated as a pass rusher, mainly because his previous responsibilities prevented him from utilizing that skill set to the fullest. So I think he could push for one of those 8 to 9 sack seasons, while increasing his chances for tackles for loss, other big play numbers. So DL 100, I need a drink, man. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean he's going behind guys like Aziz Ojolari, Anthony Jennings, Nick Herbig. So like again, like guys that, you know, maybe have sexy names, but we have no idea when we're going to be able to start these guys in our IDP lineups, right? Like they're not full-time starters. I mean, Nick Herbig, he's a fun player out of Wisconsin, had really strong pass rush metrics, but he's playing behind two workhorse edges in Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, right? So Kenny Clark, at the very least, he's not coming off the field very much for as far as interior defensive linemen go. And, you know, one thing I've talked about a lot this offseason, was expected sacks, which for anyone who was just tuning in maybe for the first time this offseason, because they see Justin on the channel, which I can't blame you if this is the first time you'd be interested. It's a metric that I found to be the most stable and predictive metric for defensive linemen, both edge and defensive tackle year to year. And you know, for sacks. And Clark was one of the position's leaders in that metric in 2023, 6.7 expected sacks. That was the sixth best mark among defensive tackles. Aaron Donald was number one. So, you know, with him being retired now, maybe we could get away with calling it a top 5 mark for Clark heading into the season. But, you know, he's established himself at, like you said, as one of the most impressive pass rushers from the interior of the defensive line. Like his numbers showed that again last year. On top of that 6th ranked expected sack total, he was 10th best in quick pressure rate at the position, 10th best overall pressure rate, tied for 22nd in win rate, had a solid 74.4 pass rush grade, and he plays a lot of snaps for that defense in all situations, which I think has to be accounted for, right? 809 defensive snaps in the regular season, was tied for 11th most among defensive tackles. So there should be a nice production floor for him thanks to that volume. You know, the problem last year was that it wasn't really the case, because even with 32 tackles on the year, he came in 22.6 under expected, which was the second worst mark in the league, ahead of only Chris Jones of the Kansas City Chiefs. But like Chris Jones, you know, to a lesser extent, we're not drafting him for his tackling ability, and he could get back up there anyways. But his big play upside, based on that pass rush ability, is really what makes him attractive. And if he bounces back with a few more tackles closer to what he was doing like in 2022, then that's just another nice bonus for a guy like Kenny Clark, which, you know, again, DL 100. You're not getting 800 snaps that deep in drafts. So I would absolutely be taking advantage of that value there. Okay, my pick for sleeper / value here along the defensive line is Dorrance Armstrong, now of the Washington Commanders. He is going as DL 73, edge 54. I have him ranked as edge 34. Now, I wrote up Armstrong in my breakout defensive line article a couple weeks ago, because I really am expecting like this to be his best year in terms of production. But it's clear that he's only being drafted to right around where he finished last season, despite a lot of positive changes in his favor for 2024. The first being that he's going to a new team, away from Dallas, where he was kind of stifled on that depth chart behind elite and established stars like Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. So now he goes to the Commanders. He reunites with Dan Quinn, his defensive coordinator in Dallas. And the Commanders just happen to be maybe the most edge-needy team in the entire league after trading away Chase Young and Montez Sweat last season. So, you know, without any true incumbents there to step into significant roles, I think by all accounts, like Armstrong is going to be the starter for them this year, despite never having played more than 325 pass rush snaps in a single season. He's never cracked the top 50 at his position in overall snaps in his career either. But I think that should all change this year pretty drastically, probably, with a nice boost in volume and arguably their best and most tenured edge on the team. Like he reached new career highs in his pass rush metrics in 2023, including a 70.1 pass rush grade, 13% pressure rate, 12.2% win rate. Like continuing that level of play on a larger workload, I think should allow for him to produce similar results in the sack column, if not, you know, exceed his 7.5 from last season. But as a tackler, I think Armstrong proved to be among the better players at his position in that regard last season as well. He ranked among the 80th percentile in tackles versus expected, despite playing fewer run defensive snaps than 83% of the other players in that range. You know, his larger, I think, expected role on rundowns this year specifically should push him from kind of well outside that top 50 IDP scores at his position to kind of comfortably within that top 36 in 2024. And that's the thing. I'm not even saying he's going to be this, elite top 12, top 24 option. I have him ranked as edge 34, but again, he's essentially being drafted at his floor right now at edge 54, which again was right about where he finished last year on way less snaps. So there's just, I think, a lot of value for him to absorb there with, a larger expected role this season. So I think he's a nice sleeper here, in my opinion.
Man, this is a great find, John. Like to me, this is the gem of this list, because really, like, this is the sort of thing we're looking for, the player who starts showing up. I remember, was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Javon Hargrave out of nowhere, quote unquote, started just rocking it in Philly next to Fletcher Cox. And he was a guy that people weren't paying attention to because he didn't have a full-time role yet. He's obviously also, it looks like he's buried behind Fletcher Cox or playing next to Fletcher Cox, and he's invisible. But, this was a person who, all of a sudden everybody was scrambling to their waiver wire to pick up guys like Javon Hargrave. We saw that a little bit with Jonathan Gennard a couple years ago with the Texans as well. Where do these players come from? How could you find these players? I mean, this is an absolute great example. I was looking at the list, rotational DLs like Lucas Van Ness, Leonard Floyd, Nolan Smith. These guys are all going off the boards before Armstrong. And he really is. You're totally right. He's staring at a 700 to 900 snap role here. He's just staring it right in the face. We talked earlier about like stacking the odds in your favor, right? We don't know what's going to happen. Every training camp day, every preseason game shifts the cards a little bit. So as of right now, all we can do is stack the odds as much as possible in our favor. I love what you said about Dan Quinn bringing him over and saying, man, clearly he's the new DC there. And he said, I want to bring this guy I just worked with over the last couple of years. And I want to put him in a starting job. Like, look at that depth chart. Who is going to leapfrog Armstrong right now? They really don't have anybody there. So he's got a clear path to a lot of snaps. Obviously, Dan Quinn likes him. He actually has put up, solid pass rush grades and done well in a limited role, right? So, to me, and also if you look over the last couple of years, his pressures and his sacks have been on the rise. And he's only been playing 400 to 500 snaps, kind of, as you were saying, working behind the, DeMarcus Lawrence's and the Micah Parsons. Now he gets a full-time job. He can get just 6 or 7 sacks on 400 snaps. Now imagine that on 800 or 900 snaps. I totally agree. This is somebody, what I would love to do is if I'm playing in a league where I'm starting 2 DLs, let's say, and I need a couple on my bench, I'm throwing on. I mean, he'll be one of my very first bench players, knowing that he'll be I think he's going to be a solid DL3 all season. Might even blow up. He might be the next Javon Hargrave. We'll have to see. Maybe Dan Quinn, again, who has seen this player every single day for the last couple of years. Maybe he sees something and knows exactly how to utilize Armstrong in a way to have him blow up. So when everybody's running to the waiver wire to pick up Dorrance Armstrong in week 2 or week 3, just remember Jon Macri set you up for this.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? Like, again, we got to do some projecting when we're looking at who these players are going to be for 2024 and not just, copy paste from 2023. And they're absolutely, kind of the arrows pointing up as far as Dorrance Armstrong goes in Washington. So hopefully that all comes to fruition. But a couple more names here, Justin. Let's talk about another one of your guys that you like here, the value. A third-year edge out of Kansas City, George Karlaftis. Tell us about him.
Well, each year I rant about how rookie defensive linemen usually just don't come out of the gate killing it. I mean, it obviously does happen, but however great they are in their rookie year, they are on the path to being even better than that in the future. It's a massive transition for a rookie defensive lineman to start posting up against veteran O linemen. they've seen all your little cute pass rush moves a million times. They've spent way longer in the gym than you have. And there are far fewer weak spots on NFL offensive lines than there were in college. So, Karlaftis was a high draft pick for the Chiefs. He had an okay rookie season. Last year, he was a sophomore, and we really started to see this jump into really top 20 defensive lineman category, right? So I think it takes 2 or 3 years for DLs to hit their stride. And then we saw that from Karlaftis last year. He started to begin making that move up in his second season. What I really like is that a lot of it happened toward the end of the season, which means he was getting better as the season went on. Now, it's not an incredibly stable metric, but the average pressure to sack rate is about 20 to 25%. So let's say 1 out of every 4 or 5 pressures ends up being a sack. So if we just use that fuzzy math for a second, Karlaftis posted at least 4 pressures in 10 of 17 games in the regular season, right? So we expected a sack. We expected 10 sacks in the regular season. What I really like, again, is, like I said, is how he improved and how he closed out the season. Obviously, the Chiefs played a few more games in the postseason. During those 4 playoff games for the Chiefs, he had 19 pressures and 4 sacks. And if you count week 17, that's 5 straight games to end the year with at least 4 pressures. So last year, he finished the regular season as DL 27 in balanced scoring. He's coming into his year 3. He's got a strong chance to finish, I think, inside the top 25 easily. To me, that makes him a strong DL2 target. Right now, he's coming off the boards as DL 31. Now, like some of the other players we mentioned, that's not a huge value, right? You're not leapfrogging 5-6 rounds. But again, if people are thinking Karlaftis is a late DL2 or DL3 possibly, I'm jumping on him as my top DL2 target, right? So because he's an ascending talent. He's obviously on a team that should still be leading plenty. That means it's going to give you plenty of pass rush and big play opportunities. So while your league mates are taking guys like Trevon Walker, Carl Granderson, Jermaine Johnson, all of whom are being drafted over before Karlaftis at this point, thanks to IDP shows ADP data. I would love to have him as my DL2. I think it's a great value in my eyes. Again, he posted 10.5 sacks in the regular season. Don't be surprised if he ends up with more like 15 this year and he moves himself into that DL1 conversation.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot to like about George Karlaftis, and I'm with you. I like the value here. I have him slightly above where he's being drafted as well. Like, I know he doesn't have like the sexiest of pass rush metrics, through his first couple of seasons in the league, but he's improving and he's been productive, right? And productive based on volume while slowly improving as a pass rusher does at least mean there's something to be encouraged about. So, he is getting kind of overlooked here. He's not like this exciting prospect coming out of college or anything like that. But like you said, typically years 3, year 4 is where we really start to see pass rushers hit their stride in the NFL. And as a former first round pick, I wouldn't be surprised at all if this is, it ends up being Furious George's best season so far. Like, I think, making that leap like he did from year 1 to year 2, as far as all of his metrics, he cleaned up his missed tackles, he was more productive. Those are the kinds of things that we hope kind of remain linear in terms of his development, which, of course, doesn't always work that way, but they're promising first steps, right? And, if he wants to get back to those double-digit sacks again like he did last year, continuing to improve as a pass rusher is going to help that quite a bit. But he's also locked into like a volume heavy role, which you got to love too, for, a guy that's just going to be on the field a lot, and being able to produce by default a lot of the times is going to really help that production as well. So yeah, I like this call quite a bit here with George Karlaftis.
Yeah, and I like that he's also playing next to Chris Jones. We've seen it time and time again. If you've got these like monster defensive tackles, playing next to you, they are going to command a lot of attention. So Karlaftis is likely learning to take advantage of fewer double teams, and obviously we get to take advantage of that. Speaking of a defensive lineman who should be getting fewer double teams because of the pair of monster defensive tackles he's playing next to. Let's talk about your last defensive lineman. Who you got there, John?
Yeah, so this is a name that I can't help but feel like I have to keep talking about this offseason just because based on where he's being valued right now, I can't help but feel like he is maybe a great sleeper option heading into this season. It's Josh Sweat of the Philadelphia Eagles going as DL 37 right now. I have him as DL 23. And I want to start with one of the first things that kind of stood out to me looking at the ADP is that he's being drafted behind his teammate Bryce Huff at the moment. And this could just be a best ball thing, aiming for upside. You can make that argument that Huff has maybe more sack upside based on his pass rush metrics. But if this translates to redraft this value, then to me, it's an easy value to take advantage of. And part of that just comes down to playing time again, right? For consistent production and a much better floor for Sweat versus Huff, who, again, I like Huff as a pass rusher, but that's kind of all he is in the NFL right now until he proves otherwise, is a designated pass rusher. And Fangio has already come out and said that he still needs to work on his ability to defend the run, which to me indicates that he's not going to be not getting as nearly as many of those opportunities on early downs again this season, which has kind of been a lot of the problem for his career. So that's one thing. But then focusing on Sweat, specifically and being drafted as DL 37, he ranked top 12 at his position in expected sacks last season, posting strong pass rush metrics, but also excellent playing time, which I think should only continue here. People are going to be down on him because he only delivered 6.5 sacks when, they probably overpaid for him in drafts last year, coming off an 11 sack season, right? That Matt Milano effect that we talked about earlier, people are going to be a little bit bitter, right? And, it's just natural for fantasy. Like we're a fickle bunch. We get burned. We get mad at these players. We take it personally. We don't want to, get at them again, but it can cost us at times. And that'll happen, when we chase sacks specifically, we're going to get burned. So instead, we kind of trust the expected sack numbers to remain stable after last year. That was the best year that we've ever seen from him, even though it didn't show up in the sack column. And I think we should absolutely profit off that for those that kind of continue to, chase last year's points. We could take advantage of a nice value here. I think he should absolutely be in for like another 800 plus snap season, especially with Hassan Reddick gone. Like he's going to lead the pack there again. And I'd bet on him to being the most consistent and productive player on that entire defensive line this year. So I love the value here. I'd be taking Sweat all day at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's going to see a bump in snaps a little bit from where he was last year, and that'll help him move that from that like 40 tackle / 6 to 8 sack seasons that we've seen. Obviously 2022 he had that double-digit sack year. He could actually get back to that. We see that bump up just from opportunity, from volume, up to more like 50 tackles, 9 to 10 sacks, and that's the range we're looking for our DL2. You can let some of the bigger names fall and wait, and then scoop up Sweat later. You'd mentioned Huff's inability to stop the run. Remember that Fangio's defenses are built around having fewer people on the line to stop the run. So that frees up his, the back half of his defense. So he obviously has two ginormous run stuffers there in the middle. And so he's definitely going to need his edges to also play that kind of gap and a half mentality and be able to stop the run, which means Huff will likely only be showing up on obvious passing downs. That is just going to help Sweat rack up maybe another 100 or 200 snaps, and that's all he really should need. I also just felt like he got a little unlucky in his snaps last year. So I really like this call too as well. The theme here obviously is we are finding these guys who are not the sexy names, not the names that you're hearing everybody bragging about in training camp and watching highlight videos, and they are slipping back in drafts. And if you could stack some of these up, and basically, there's almost a path here where you can draft your IDPs a round or two later than almost everyone and hit some of these values. In the meantime, stacking up some potential offensive targets, or just having some great options on the bench. Imagine that when it's that bye week, you're sliding in a Josh Sweat or somebody like that, or some of these other linebackers like or definitely Dorrance Armstrong. You might end up starting him to begin with. So I think that's really the theme here. I hope everybody gets a chance to utilize these in your drafts. Again, if you're drafting soon, I think these numbers are going to hold up pretty well. As we get closer to the season, you want to recheck this. But I definitely think across the board, we found some players here who we think the general consensus is far lower on them than both me and John think or is possible.
Yeah. No, that was perfectly said, Justin. I can't agree more. Sometimes, IDP, we got to get ugly with it. We got to find these players that don't have, the banner names or anything like that. And that's what the game is a lot of the time. So these are kind of the guys that we like right now. I'm sure there's plenty more if we dig into the data to find them. But that is going to do it for our IDP sleepers and values for the 2024 season. I'm checking in here on the Hall of Fame game, seeing if we got anything interesting coming out of the snap counts for this one. Any position on Chicago or Houston that you want to know specifically about? Because I promise you the names are not sexy. You want to talk about sleepers?
Yeah, no kidding. I would just say, Houston linebackers.
Yes.
In terms of their depth.
So Houston linebackers right now, we're looking at Delshon Phillips and Jake Hansen starting the game. So those are some guys there. Neville Hewitt still around, playing a few snaps. There is. That's pretty much it for them. Even Chicago, like they're not playing their starting linebackers right now. And Jack Sanborn's not playing either. They got guys like Micah Baskerville, I've never heard of. Paul Mola. So we're not missing much here in the preseason game, Justin, but I can't thank you enough for jumping on here and doing this with me every year. It's always a blast to get to talk to you and get your insights as well. So thank you very much for coming on, man. And I appreciate it.
Man, it really is. I'm not mincing words here. It really, truly is an honor. Love doing this. Let's try to do it some in the regular season. Would love to chop it up with you again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to that. But before you go please let everyone know what you got going on this year over at Fantasy Points as well.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Down with IDP. And I'm doing all the IDP stuff over there for fantasypoints.com. Also featuring a lot of heavy stuff in terms of content in terms of betting this year. We're still trying to just keep hammering away at some of these great bets that we're seeing in the IDP landscape as well. So you see a little bit more of that from my perspective or from my end, and then also all the regular IDP stuff as well.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check that out. And also, again, thanks to the IDPshow.com for the ADP data. Again, you can get access to that for $5 a month at the IDPshow.com as part of their draft kit as well. As for me, I've written up all my dark horse picks for the overall fantasy number one at each offensive position this week. I'll be writing up dark horse IDP ones for next week as well, which I'm excited to put out there, maybe get a little spicy if we like. And then next week, after talking values tonight, it's only right that we come back with some fades to discuss as well. And who better to join me to do that than the legendary Tom Kisslingberry. So I hope you'll all join me for that one as well. And until then, peace out.